إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره وأعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. This blessed day, Friday, the best day of the week, I greet you as we have been taught to Allah by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This day is Friday, Jumu'ah, but this day is a special day. Not that all the Fridays are special, but this one, in the aspect of Hajj, Jumu'ah July. And Jumu'ah July is special as to what comes from it and what can come out of it. So, but sometimes we don't remember in specifics what it is that sitting at Arafah means. And if we're not at Arafah, what are we doing here in replication of those who sit at Arafah? What is there to be gained? More importantly, what is there to be lost? And not observing as best we can the state of Arafah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through the Prophet Saiful-Islam and Khateeb, everyone knows, Jumu'ah al-Islam ala house. Indeed, Islam is built upon 5. And one of the 5 is to visit Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala once in a lifetime, physically afforded at His house, to answer His call. Doesn't ask for 2 or 3 times, just once. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows us. He created us. He knows our weaknesses, our strengths, and being men, and being women, and being humankind. So the command is to visit Him once at His house. There's some discussion in the tafsir about this circumstance, because when you read certain aspects about the visit to the house, Allah says, Ya ayyuhan nas, and not Ya ayyuhan ladina amanu, Ya ayyuhan nas. So this visit, being one of the pillars that Islam is built upon, is something that's looked at it for all mankind. So we want to take a look at what is it that has Hajj be the 5th pillar? What is it that Allah gives to us, allows us the opportunity to gain from Him? Because in that we still have to remember from the Prophet ﷺ, as much as ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasul, some would say is the bedrock of the deen, entering into it, of course, of our own free will, not being coerced, not being made to do so. But that is the bedrock. That right next to it from the Prophet ﷺ, Kuli amalan bin niyat. Every action is led by intent. And during the times that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed me to be before you, granted me the opportunity to talk about this. Not so much because of me, but because of how crucial that everything we do, everything, has to be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Him and Him alone. And the Prophet is not part of that. Not at all. And there's a hadith in which a person is given a talk, and he referred to the importance of obeying Allah and His Prophet. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you are a bad speech giver And he asked him why. He said, because you included me with the law, and you don't do that. So the intent of whatever we do that is good, that we can receive a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in terms of ibadah, has to be purely for his sake and his sake alone. And what we have to do is to realize that what we deem to be small in terms of our humanness may not be seen to be small in our eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for example, a child who gains age, here knowing the difference between right and wrong. The mother commands them to do something, and they bristle up. They talk back in a tone that is unbecoming for them and is not warranted by her. The child, depending upon the age, may think nothing of it. But at the point that that voice becomes one of disrespect, of disobedience, that child is at war with the law. No ifs, no ands, no buts. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, you should not say I to those who bore us, and tells us not to separate ourselves from the wombs who bore us. That's exactly what he means. And what happens is that when you're young, not to get away from the topic, when you're young, we think that we're immortal. We think that we will live forever until somebody close at the same age the law takes. And even then, sometimes the children won't listen. It goes even farther, out of the aspect of the mother, just what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself has commanded. So then, that child, whether he or she may be, that would raise their voice at their mother, disrespect their father, disrespect their home, their house, whether they realize it or not, they're at war with the Lord who created them. And until they return, i.e., consciously, to the mother that's been disrespected and ask for her forgiveness and observe the aspects of Torah, they remain at war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in the Quran, the 22nd surah is Surah Al-Hajj. I read Surah Al-Hajj this morning. The fear from what is in Surah Al-Hajj and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is enough for us to understand why the pilgrims sit at Arafah all day, and why we, as best we can, should observe that as well. Surah Al-Hajj is more than 5 to 6 descriptions of the last day. It doesn't mention anything about the Hajj in terms of its performance, or being there, or even of it being a pillar of the deen. But what it does give in specifics is why if one goes to Hajj with pure intentions, in this case this year, if they made the intent to go to Hajj because of a rule instituted by the Saudi government that says that anyone beyond the age of 65 cannot make Hajj. Now someone is going to say, where does that come from in terms of the Quran and the Sunnah? And I'll be the first to say, I don't know. It's the first time that this has happened. I know of circumstances where populations have been decreased because of certain things that happened. In 1987 at Hajj, I was in the kingdom. And this is the year that the Iranians demonstrated. They had been allowed to bring 175,000 individuals to Hajj. And they had demonstrations, violent demonstrations. Saudi security forces were beaten, some killed. People not even involved in any aspect of the political circumstance. I remember watching a brother from Indonesia and his family get accosted by the Iranian pilgrims and beaten. And at that point, Ibn Baz, rahimahullah, who was the mufti at the time, said, no, we can't allow this happen. People who are coming for Hajj have to be here in peace and safety. The next year for Hajj, the Iranian complement was cut to 35,000. So there's circumstances like that that take place. But in this particular instance, I don't know, as Allah knows best, but the reason is behind it. But it does point to something. It points to the fact again, Kuli Amrin Diniyai. For those who have been blessed to go to Hajj, we assume and pray that in their intentions that they have been accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for those who have not, because of this fact to be able to go, that in their intent for wanting to go, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward them as if they did go. And I would add, for those of you amongst us, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His grace and mercy has allowed to make Hajj, has allowed you to visit Him at His house, please be thankful. Please be thankful that He has allowed you to do so. So that on that final day, when the only shade will be the shade given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can stand before Him, having completed all of the pillars, especially that Hajj, because it gave you the opportunity to have everything that needed to be forgiven to be forgiven. And I pray that that is what happened for those of you who've been able to do so. That lesson in and of itself is amazing. That Allah said, yes, I will allow you to answer that call. Come to me, come and visit me. And if you do so purely for the intent of my pleasure, this is what I will give to you. Is there anyone here that will not give everything within reason to be able to do that? So for some of us, unless that rule changes, we won't be able to make Hajj. The idea of death approaching and taking and not having been able to complete Hajj is beyond frightening. Beyond frightening. The world has gotten even more dangerous. But even in doing so, it doesn't change our relationship with Allah and what we have to be about. So tomorrow, let's get al-Asr. that we would celebrate. We all know the story. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, his willingness to sacrifice his son, Ishaq, salam, for the sake of Allah, and Allah providing a ram for him. But that aspect, what do we learn? We see in Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to him as Khalil, his special friend. Even with the status that the Prophet has, and that is a thing of disrespect. We don't see that title given to Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Ibrahim, Khalilullah, friend of Allah, because he didn't question. He simply moved to do what he felt that he had to do. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted him a circumstance. One of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Hajj, he talks about all of the prophets that messages came to. And he goes on and he makes the statement and saying and talking about them, that indeed, Iblis, that every time that who the prophet was, and the message came, he would try to interject nonsense into the message, discord, however you want to call it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Hajj that he was prevented from doing so. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says something else. He says, but sometimes what Iblis was doing, he allowed to be done to test those who say that they believe. So on one hand, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no, messages have come. He tries, but Allah prevents it. But then Allah says, but sometimes he allows him to do something that becomes a test for those who say that they believe. And once again, we see the importance of Arafah and standing at Arafah and not being there, spending the time, some of the time of the day. I know those of us that have to work and have other responsibilities, but seeking that forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At Hajj, I haven't been to Umrah, alhamdulillah. But those who have been to Hajj will testify about the things that they see. See, Hajj is not a vacation. The Prophet said, you prepare for Hajj as you are preparing to go to war. And you see things. I can tell you from being at home. You see things. And you wonder how, why. So being at Hajj is not a picnic. It's very strenuous. And sitting at Arafah that day, as hot as it may be, is a respite. No moving, no jostling, just sitting there, seeking Allah's forgiveness. It's a respite given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Hajj is strenuous. I can't say that enough. It used to be, and I'm not saying this was a tradition as such, but I remember Hajjs in which people died. I remember Hajjs in one year, huge fire took place. And people in Muzdalifah were burned there. And thus again, the importance of the niyah, fully evident in niyah, Because if they went there purely for the sake of Allah, if one had to die, there's no better place than there in that circumstance. So no Hajj is not a vacation. And I say that because sometimes we in the West, we get things, like, wow, we're on a plane, we're going to Saudi Arabia, and but you're going to a place where there may be 3.5 million people from everywhere. Different cultures, different languages. And the only thing that's uniting you in being there is La ilaha illallah. If they're there for a different reason than that, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deal with it. I never will forget watching on TV in Saudi, this Iranian couple. The husband was about 75, the wife was about 75. And they had been stopped because of their baggage. Because in the bottom of their baggage was C4 explosives. You can take 8 ounces of C4 and blow up this whole building and a couple of buildings next to it. So the Iranians were attempting the possibility of bombs at the Kaaba. And so finally, when he spoke to the man and his wife, he told them, when we got ready to board the plane, they took my bags. They took my wife's bags. We didn't get them back until we got here. It just so happened that the person who took their bags was there and they pointed him out. He was a part of Iranian intelligence. Never saw him again. So Hajj is strenuous. But if you can make it, be blessed to make it, to visit Allah in His house. It's so uplifting. And of course, just to mention one other thing about Hajj, Malcolm X, Al-Hajj al-Malik. Look at the uplifting that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him. And it had to be. I pray that it was because of his sincerity and his intention of going there to please Allah. And Allah changed his whole life. That's why Hajj is so special. People go there and come back totally changed. And you have to assume that the niyah was correct. Al-Adha. We talk about sacrifice and what Prophet Ibrahim was willing to do with Ishaq. All of the prophets who came, especially those with messages, had tests. What's striking about Surah Al-Hajj, we know that some surahs in the Quran have places that when you read an ayat, you make sajda. Surah Al-Hajj doesn't have one, it has 2. In reading it, you read those ayats. Surah Al-Hajj. Visiting Allah at His house. Al-Adha. Seeking Allah's forgiveness and mercy. Being blessed to sit there all that day. Pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that those who were blessed to go, no matter what the year, no matter what the time, that when you sat there that day, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted you His mercy and His forgiveness. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله وأتوب إليه. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين على آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. There's a hadith associated with, if you read the first 15 ayats of Surah Al-Hajj. And it's frightening. Hadith is as such. It's been compiled by Imam Tirmidhi, Imam Ahmad, Imam Bukhari. And as they state, as Ibn Kathir states in his tafsir, there's so many hadith about the portents of the last day. And at that particular point, he said, not to mention them all, but he mentioned this particular one, variations of it from the Prophet ﷺ. One version from Tirmidhi, rahimahullah, the Prophet and some of his companions were traveling, and the companions were lagging behind. And so the Prophet ﷺ got their attention. And as it got to them, and he got their attention because he talked about a day in which there's no doubt. So when the Sahaba with him got close to him, Ya Rasulullah, what is it that you wish to tell us? He said, you know the day that I was speaking about, you know what day that is. And they said, no, Allah and His Messenger knows best. He said, Yawm al-Qiyamah. Now he really, not that he didn't have the attention before, but he really had the attention now. And so the Prophet ﷺ said, on the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call Prophet Adam, alayhi salam. And Adam, alayhi salam, would answer, yes. What is it that you wish of me? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell him, call all of your people who will be in the hellfire. Call all of your people who will be in the hellfire. And he said, how many will that be? And the Prophet ﷺ said, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say to Adam, out of every 1,000, 999 will go to the hellfire. Out of every 1,000, 999 will go to the hellfire. And the Sahaba began to cry. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, but in essence, it won't be you, as Allah knows best. And he says to them, I pray that you will be a quarter of the people of paradise. And the Sahaba with him said, Allahu Akbar. And then he said, I pray that you will be 50% of the people of paradise. And he said, Allahu Akbar again. In one narrative, the person reciting the hadith says, I can't remember if he said 2/3. In another, he does say 2/3. And again, the Sahaba saying, Allahu Akbar. And then the question is, where will the people come from that will be in the hellfire? In the narratives, the Prophet said that they will come from God and Magog. And for those who have turned their back, and no matter what the time, with La ilaha illallah, and they have went to their deaths, not had circumstances, change the circumstances. And in this, in Surah Al-Hajj, is mentioned the aspect from Allah about the Sabi'in, Christians, Masihim, and others. And Allah says, on that day, He will decide between them. Let's be perfect about clear about one thing here. No message came with other than La ilaha illallah. And so for those people that He has mentioned, that He said He will decide between them on Yom Qiyamah, those who receive His mercy or those who believe in La ilaha illallah. Perfectly clear. As Allah states. So but imagine, out of 1,999, the hellfire. And another hadith, it gives a figure of 100,000 and says out of 100,000, 999 will be in the hellfire. So please let us understand the importance of Hajj. If we can't go, Ya Allah, let us have a sincere intention to go. Because Allah in His grace and mercy rewards us for the pure intentions, even if there's something we can't get to do. Let us remember, without Allah's forgiveness, we are lost. Period. It's real simple. At the point that we get in thinking that we can be in this life without being in Allah's favor, we are lost. Pure and simple. Hajj is one of the 5 pillars, Bunyal Islam al-Khams. And Hajj is right there. But in specifics, look what's gained at Hajj, if the intent is pure. If the intent is pure. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, He begs us, He asks us to make a beautiful lawn to Him. So when it comes to this masjid, this Jumu'ah, this Jumu'ah, are we willing to make a beautiful lawn to Allah? No matter what the capacity. Kulli amalan bin niyah. Let the niyah be for this Jumu'ah. Because sometimes, as Allah knows best, I think we really don't understand what Fisabilillah means and the importance of it. And we need to. Death walks amongst us every day. Every day. Just think, in the past 6 months, someone you know went to sleep, did not wake up, was found unconscious, did not regain consciousness. And Allah in His mercy, see, when one of us passes, the only thing that can be said that it was that person's time. We have no idea of knowing that perhaps how many times Allah extended their time. And notice what Allah says again in Surah Al-Hajj. He talks about this. He doesn't ever shorten a person's time. The time that's decreed is the time that it will take place. As Allah says in the Surah, the person will not die 1 minute before or 1 minute after the time that's been established. And the only one that can change the time that's been established is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In our humanness, we have no way of knowing how many times we may have had our time extended through Allah's grace and mercy, or for whatever reasons that He decided to do so. So, pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts our ibadah, that He purifies our intentions, that we live and breathe and walk and speak, that whatever we do, if we haven't gotten there, that He blesses us to get to the point that we're doing it for His sake. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على الكافرين. أقم الصلاة. Right.